How are you doing? I suppose I've worked for, most of you will have heard of CYC. Some of you will have heard of Crosscare as well. That's the CYC Crosscare we're merging together. For those of you who don't know that, so just to clear up that little sort of, what's Crosscare? I thought you worked for CYC. Or those of you who haven't met me before. But I've basically, over the last sort of 15, 16 years, in various capacities in my job, I've worked with GYDPs or garden diversion projects, and for the last good while, some of that responsibility has been around supporting staff to write their annual reports in whatever way that has been. And at one time I would have written annual reports myself, and to varying degrees of success. And I suppose I should preempt this by saying we haven't got there yet. We don't. I don't know it all. We do make a lot of mistakes, and part of my approach, whether the staff that I support know it or not, is to actually encourage them to make mistakes as well. Because I think a lot of the learning that we have, and a lot of the learning that I've seen our staff go through over the last 5 years or so with the change of how they've been asked to report, they've actually done most of their learning similar to the young people when they make mistakes, when they get it wrong. When they realise afterwards that actually they could have done it better, or they could have communicated things a little bit better. And I think the previous speakers have kind of, focused in on that listen, this is all about communicating what it is we do in this bizarre world that we call youth work, what it is we do and what we're trying to achieve with young people. And I think that if you look back at how we used to report, a lot of it was all about what we do. And for a long time it wasn't just about what we do, but it was about what actually, we were kind of trying to preempt what it is the person who's reading this and deciding on the money, what it is they want us to say, rather than on looking at what we're doing or describing what we're doing or what we're achieving locally. So it was all about, well, what words do they like seeing? They love that word. That word has 3 syllables in it. We'll use that one over and over again throughout the report. So a lot of our struggle, the struggle that I've had with staff, is kind of letting go of some of that flowery language and actually just trying to sort of go, well, just distill it down and just talk about what it is you do, and try and use that as your starting point. Get away from all this fancy terminology. I suppose keep reminding them that I still, after all of these years, mix up inputs and outputs and outcomes and objectives and aims, and which one is it again, and go back to the definition, and again, just not to be afraid, I suppose, to make mistakes and get it wrong, because it's through that we kind of make things a little bit better and a little bit tighter and a bit more easy to understand. I suppose what makes our job a little bit more difficult, and I'm sure I'm talking for most people in the room, not just those who work for garden diversion projects, but a lot of what we're doing is we're trying to talk about, we're working with very difficult young people by and large. Let's face it, most of the way youth work has been funded over the last while, it is for those disadvantaged communities. We're working in quite chaotic circumstances. We're quite chaotic ourselves, youth workers are, it doesn't fit in nice little neat boxes. And the work that we do doesn't fit in those nice little neat boxes from January to December. We start something in November and it doesn't finish until the following March. We plan to start something in February, it doesn't actually start until September because all sorts of other things happen. We're used to kind of going with that flow of things, and it comes down to distilling that down into a report. It gets a bit tougher to distill down what it is that we're actually doing. I think the other thing that our staff have had a challenge with is that in terms of how we used to be reporting, we don't always work with groups of young people that fit neatly into our Tuesday group does this, our Wednesday group does this, our Thursday group does that. We swap over young people depending on what's going on for them at the time. Sometimes they're friends with this group. My Friday, they hate that group, so therefore we need to, but they're actually best friends with the other group, so we need to change the day. Sometimes it's about, a full piece of work that we want to include people in, so we pull them from all the different groups that we're working with. So again, it doesn't fit nice and neatly into boxes, so we can get a little bit muddled when we're trying to describe that to other people. So for a little bit of a while, I remember a time where some of the reports that I was reading, it actually looked like the youth workers were trying to pull the wool over the eyes of people who were getting funding, because all of a sudden, hang on a second, you said you were working with 20 young people, but it seems like you're actually working with about 50. or the other way around, that, are these young people the same as those young people? How long have you been working with those young people? Does it, so trying to make sense of, how we were describing the stuff was actually quite clumsy, and it was quite difficult to get your head around it. Funnily enough though, when you sit down and when we talk about youth work, when we describe what it is that we do day to day, Monday to Friday, January to March, or however we organise our time, we start to get a little bit better at it's a little easier to understand what it is that we're doing. So we talk a better talk than we write. We're learning how to write. We are getting much, much better at the reports I'm seeing coming into me. We have 11 GYDPs, so I have the joy of going down through their information and seeing what it is that they have identified as outcomes, not always outcomes, but they're trying to communicate across what it is they achieved. And they're definitely getting clearer about what they're doing. Some of my frustration in dealing with them, I mentioned it, I think, in the article, I'm not sure if I did, but is that, it's after the report is submitted that I actually go out to them and I start, we're doing another piece of work, maybe a bit of a developmental piece, and I start talking to them about, well, how are things going, what are you doing at the moment, what's the big piece of work that's taking up all of your time? And they start telling me about something that is really, really good, really interesting, so a lot of the time really innovative, and how they're doing it, I suppose, is really, how they're getting over the obstacles for the young people or for the community is really interesting stuff. And my frustration is, why wasn't that in your report? That's brilliant, so for a lot of it, we're actually selling ourselves short. We're doing some really good work, but we're forgetting to tell anybody about it. So we're in our own little microcosm, and I think that's really understandable because we work a bizarre timetable as well in youth work. A lot of us do quite late nights, and we're up early the next morning. There's a crisis to deal with. There's a young person who's been kicked out of school. We have to try and negotiate that and set up meetings and start that mediation process, check in with the family, can't find the family, it takes you 3 days to find the young person. All of, we're doing this in all of that sort of higgledy-piggledy world. So that, trying to make sense of all of those things, when we eventually get time to sit down and think, well, actually, what was it that we planned to do? What was those fancy outcomes that we set out at the start of the year? So it is understandable that we struggle with it. But I suppose, I think the other two speakers kind of hit home what the importance of that as well. I suppose the other thing that I wanted to hit home in relation to this, so part of what I've seen over the last few years introducing the logic model into the GYDP planning, first of all, I would say that an awful lot of projects can do their planning retrospectively. So it's at the end of the year they look back and sort of go, oh, whoops, what was it we actually planned to do? Or they take out their plan and go, right, this is the first time I've seen it in 12 months. God, that was a really good idea. Why didn't we do that? That was amazing. Where did that piece go? So they forget about their plan. I think those that have really, benefited from allowing themselves to be, giving themselves that time to be a bit reflective and to plan well, but stay realistic in their planning. So in other words, don't try and solve the world's problems or the community's problems or the young person's problems in 12 months, but take a look at what they actually can do. That doesn't mean you don't look at the bigger problem, but that you distill it down into what can you actually get to, what can you achieve, what can you put in place for that young person in a short period of time. But if they return, the ones that do better at it in terms of their work on the ground is those that do plan well and plan realistically, but also go back to it. There are also those who are, I suppose, very honest about what they can and cannot achieve, and if they, and rejig what it was they planned at the start of the year. So actually go back and say, well, do you know what? That was actually a big ask. We planned too far ahead. We thought that, that we could have these 7 young people back in school. We thought everything was in place for them. But in actual fact, these 7 young people weren't ready to go back to school, and we've thrown that plan out. We've actually decided that we need to do a piece of work with them outside of school before they go near any education and training. So there are those that go back and actually retailer what it was that they planned. So I suppose the way I see it is that I know the logic model comes in this nice little, long bit, but I kind of see it as a circle. That you are using the whole thing. It is a planning tool. It's not the be all and end all, but it is in some ways that if you use it as a check and balance, that each stage is a check and balance on each other, and use it by going around in a circle rather than in a straight line back and forth, it actually becomes much more functional. I suppose the thing that I see it useful as well is that, again, we sometimes put together really, really intricate plans that have some really good ideas in it, and then we forget about them because the pressures of work and time take over. So, for example, I've seen, to give you an example, I've seen pieces of work that may be all around employability. And what goes into the plan is things like linking the group of young people up with local employers. There's personal development stuff in there, there's substance use programs in there, there's all sorts of other programs within that piece of work that you're doing, but kind of key in terms of bringing those young people back in touch with the workforce, was this thing of connecting them with local employers. A year goes by, 2 years goes by, the only thing that the young people have actually done are the personal development programs. The only thing that the youth workers actually managed to get around is organise those developmental programs. They haven't got to the point where they had created those partnerships with local employers. So that key piece of work that would actually maybe give them their final outcome, that's the bit that gets forgotten about. I'm sure you've seen kind of murals and stuff done, where groups of young people are involved in a mural, and it's all going to be wonderful and really motivating. And it ends up that the artists and the youth workers actually do most of the work. It's all about that. So using the logic model tool where it's useful is if you keep it realistic, you keep it real, but you keep referring back to it and use each stage